Hi everyone, welcome to the NCPA CBD Source powered by PRS webinar. My name is Linda Barnes and I am the Director of Marketing and Strategic Alliances here at PRS. NCPA and PRS have partnered together to help community pharmacists become the community CBD experts we believe they should be. And this webinar is just one of the many learning opportunities that both NCPA and PRS have collaborated on to help start you on a journey to successfully understanding and selling CBD in your pharmacy. So some of the topics that we're going to cover today include what is CBD, the endocannabinoid system, talking to customers about CBD, the FDA laws, state boards of pharmacy statements, product standards, the what, how, and why of NCPA CBD Source, and then we'll answer some questions. We have hundreds of attendees today and lots of questions that have already been submitted, but please feel free to continue to ask questions via the chat feature to the right of your screen during the webinar. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible, and we will try to answer all of your questions. But if for some reason we do not get to yours, we will have contact information at the end for you to call us afterwards. All of Tim's information will be up there on the screen, so please feel free to reach out if we do not get to your question. Now I'd like to introduce our two CBD experts who will be presenting today. Tim Gregorius is a registered pharmacist, and he is our current Vice President of Operations here at PRS. He's been helping to improve the profitability of independent pharmacies for over 28 years, and most notably has now spent the last several years researching CBD for pharmacy. And he's currently working with NCPA on the CBD Source project. He's our resident CBD expert pharmacist here at PRS. Evan Gregorius is a CBD expert that we are exploiting here at PRS as our marketing assistant. He has extensive knowledge of the CBD market and has presented at numerous CBD and cannabis industry conferences. Most notably, he has assisted with the formulation of several commercially successful CBD products, including some award-winning brands. He's our in-house CBD expert and a brilliant musician, and we're happy to have his expertise here at PRS. So without further delay, let's get started. I'm going to turn things over to Tim.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you everyone in attendance. I appreciate it. NCPA CBD Source, powered by PRS, was created for a few very simple reasons. Many community pharmacists don't understand what CBD is or how it works, and there's no readily available, trusted source to find that info. And if you do find that info, what do you do with it once you have it? We pharmacists are called upon daily to translate our knowledge of drugs to benefit our customers. We started with the premise, actually, the fact that the community pharmacist is the drug expert. We're proud of that role, and our profession is built upon that trust from the community. But when it comes to CBD, most of us aren't filling that role because we don't feel like the CBD expert. Well, we hope this webinar starts you on a journey, and that's really what we're trying to accomplish here, to just get the journey started. Because there's no expectation of you being an expert in an hour, and we're going to be jumping around to 4 or 5 different topics. So this gets you started toward being just as proud of your CBD knowledge as you are of your knowledge of any other drug. Once you have that knowledge, then the question is, which products should I carry? How do I evaluate 5,000 CBD companies? Well, we've done most of the heavy lifting for you, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. But we also want to address the legal status of CBD in your state. And that concept, that idea of what's going on from state to state is literally changing daily. To get started, what do you need to know about CBD? Number one, it is not medical marijuana.
We repeat, it is not medical marijuana.
we jokingly emphasize that point because as recently as just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at a pharmacist gathering, and I had said CBD multiple times in the previous several minutes. We clearly the topic was CBD. A pharmacist in the back of the room raised her hand and quizzically said, well, I thought we couldn't sell medical marijuana in this state except in marijuana dispensaries. So that idea really sort of set the tone for what is the pharmacist understanding of CBD versus medical marijuana. And an analogy that sort of popped into our heads here is we need to understand that CBD is as distinct from marijuana, and specifically medical marijuana, as acetaminophen is from oxycodone. If a pharmacist were talking about acetaminophen, no other pharmacist is going to be confused and say, but I thought oxycodone or I thought CBD was a C2. And that confusion would only come about because those are both the main ingredients in Percocet. We're never going to confuse those, but somehow we're still confusing CBD and medical marijuana. And I believe part of that is just familiarity and education. So CBD is a non-psychoactive phytocannabinoid extracted from hemp. That hemp, which is selectively bred to have undetectable amounts of THC and higher concentrations of the other phytocannabinoids like CBD and terpenes. So please allow us here an opportunity to show you and to describe several of the characteristics of CBD that have hopefully led to the to the discussion of how CBD exerts many and varied effects on our health that millions of users claim. So I've used the snake oil analogy before because it actually fits here. When we think about the icon of the snake oil or the magic elixir salesman out of the back of an 1800s covered wagon, we're looking at a salesman saying this will cure every ailment known to man. The difference here is that when people are saying, geez, this CBD sounds like snake oil, it's not a salesman telling us what it works for and why it works and how it works. It's the users. There are millions of people claiming that it treats their conditions on a regular and daily basis. Treatments for MS, insomnia, pain, fibromyalgia pain, anxiety, the list goes on. So on the surface, that sounds a little bit crazy or at least unbelievable. But once we look a little closer to understand how it works and what's going on behind the scenes, all of a sudden it doesn't sound so much like a fantasy or an unrealistic panacea. So let's look a little bit closer and we'll look in some detail at the CBD molecule itself. And that'll hopefully allow us to draw some inferences to drugs that you are already intimately familiar with. Then we can look at an example, and actually we're going to look at two examples of how and why the molecular structure of CBD and hence in comparison to THC, how its biological activity comes about. So let's compare CBD and THC. Evan?
Sure. So thank you for the introduction. Yeah, CBD has a completely different biological activity from THC, actually an opposing activity. CBD is a mild antagonist of the cannabinoid receptors in our bodies, while THC is an agonist at those receptors. In addition to that, CBD also acts as it has many other effects in the body that are similar to drugs that you're all familiar with. For example, it's an adenosine receptor antagonist like caffeine. It inhibits FAH and COX-1 and 2 enzymes like NSAIDs. It's an agonist at 5-HT1A serotonin receptors, which is the similar net effect of antidepressants like SSRIs, and it's a TRPV1 receptor agonist like capsaicin. So you can see that CBD has many additional characteristics that THC does not have. So how can this be? How can two molecules that look so similar have such opposing activities in the body? Well, similar structure doesn't just doesn't mean necessarily that the activity is the same, just that the target is shared. So you're all familiar, or at least have heard of, two compounds that are similar in structure, yet have completely opposite activities in the body: estradiol and testosterone. Back to you.
Yep. So knowing the difference between testosterone and estradiol and how they manifest completely opposite biological effects, that's central to anyone understanding the difference between male and female. And we all intuitively know this on a near childlike level, meaning even children can grasp that simple concept. So as Evan's chart described there and showed, we can have very similar compounds. CBD and THC look almost identical, but they have not completely, but they have very different biological effects. And that shows us a lot about our understanding of CBD, because people are still confusing CBD and medical marijuana and the effects of THC, but we really should be looking at that as completely differently as we look at the effects, at least biologically, of estradiol and testosterone. Because if we don't even have a childlike understanding of CBD and how it works and how it's different than THC, then we're going to have a hard time grasping the concepts of how it works and what we need to be able to tell patients about CBD. Because CBD behaves, as Evan pointed out, very similar. It mimics the action of SSRIs and NSAIDs and things like caffeine. And these are all drug categories that are very familiar to us. We're in a position every day to be counseling our patients on these drugs. They come in with a prescription for an SSRI, and we're expected to absolutely be able to walk them through what they need to know about it. But are you comfortable and confident talking to your patients or your friends or family about CBD? If you're not, and if you are, God bless you. If you're not, I'm going to guess, and I would be willing to bet that it's because you don't understand the endocannabinoid system. Well, you wouldn't be alone if you didn't understand the endocannabinoid system. And most people I talked to 5 years ago, we'd never heard of it, didn't really understand it. A little bit more on that coming up. But why don't we understand it? Why don't we understand what's going on in our bodies and completely understand the effect of CBD and endocannabinoids? Well, probably because it wasn't even discovered until the 1990s, the mid-1990s. So one thing that investigating CBD over the last couple of years has taught me personally is that CBD will make no sense until you understand the endocannabinoid system. And if you take nothing else away from this webinar, I'm asking that you please take away the concept that the endocannabinoid system is every bit as critical to a healthy, functioning human body as the cardiovascular system would be, or the endocrine system, digestive, renal, or immune system. In fact, research is showing that the ECS plays a role in regulating every other one of these organ systems in the body. It's nearly impossible to overstate the prevalence and importance of the endocannabinoid system. So let's imagine for a second that I was trying to explain the mechanisms of, say, the flu vaccine and how the flu vaccine works. The human immune system would be something that you would have to come to the table having already understood if we were going to discuss how the flu vaccine works. So if you came to the table not understanding the immune system and it was only handled as one of several topics in an hour-long webinar, such as the ECS is being discussed here in this webinar, it would be silly. It'd be pointless for the webinar to educate you that you could come away understanding how the immune system works. Well, we don't expect you to be the expert in how the endocannabinoid system works here, but the fact that that's what would happen if we were talking about the flu vaccines and the immune system, the fact that you would not necessarily understand it and we were only dealing with it as a 10-minute topic in an hour-long webinar, that wouldn't diminish how important the immune system is. but we need to learn about it, just like we need to learn about the ECS. And that's going to take work on your part. But we've tried to make that easy for you. We've put a lot of information in one place, the ncpacbdsource.com website. You see here a screenshot of the website. We really are trying to reach across the board and put fundamental descriptions up there and sort of beginners, kindergarten type articles and statements, and create more sophisticated links and other articles that are there. In the meantime, let's get you started with some of those fundamentals that are critical to understand, and then you can go down any of the rabbit holes that grab your attention once you start your own web search or you start your research wherever that is that you do it. Because I would strongly recommend that you do that. You take some time independently to educate yourself on the endocannabinoid system. And again, I would recommend that you start right here on the NCPA CBD source website. We really have a lot of links and a lot of concepts there that you can then jump off from where you're reading and what you're looking at there into other topics. Because the scope of the endocannabinoid system is phenomenal once we start looking a little closer at it. Endocannabinoid receptors are more abundant in our bodies than every other type of receptor combined. One of those facts that sort of jumps out at you. And that fact alone speaks to how important the ECS is, if there are more ECS receptors than all other combined. Before I go any further down the path of endocannabinoid system and receptors, let me mention two names that I think you should be aware of. They are Dr. Ethan Russo and Dr. Ruth Ross. Dr. Russo, he's the godfather of the endocannabinoid research world. I invite you to, again, do some research on him and look into what he's doing, who he is, what he's about, and the work that he's done. And then I advise you hold on for the ride. It's I found myself a few hours later, reading his work and listening to interviews. The man's fascinating and really it has been a source of inspiration for me to understand the endocannabinoid system. And the other name is Dr. Ruth Ross. Dr. Ross was one of the very first cannabinoid and ECS researchers. She started in the late 1990s. And if you recall, we just said that the endocannabinoid system wasn't even discovered until the mid 1990s. So she has a TED Talk that I recommend as a wonderful primer to get you started to understand the ECS. It was recorded in...
There for a minute. I think we're back up.
Okay, we lost audio. I was moving the mic as I moved to catch this. Sorry about that.
Guys.
So what we have here is just a real brief minute or two clip of Dr. Ross.
So let's do a little myth busting first of all around the endocannabinoid system. It exists throughout life. So we're actually born with an endocannabinoid system and it's there before we're born. And for example, it's very important in brain development in things like something called synaptogenesis, which is the formation of synapses, and these are the little electrical connections in your brain that allow neurotransmitters to send information. It's also involved in what's called synaptic pruning, which is the other scenario where actually some synapses that might be superfluous or extra are actually pruned away. So these are two really important functions. The endocannabinoid system is there in people who've never even heard of cannabis. So if you've lived a life or in a community where cannabis isn't a thing, you still have a wonderful functional endocannabinoid system. And importantly, the endocannabinoid system helps us understand how cannabis works. But cannabis is not the reason why the endocannabinoid system exists. So how does it work? Let's have a look at the endocannabinoid system in a little more detail. So here's the endocannabinoids. There's two of these, and these are produced in your brain and in different tissues at specific times. This is the little chemical structure of one of them. The endocannabinoids act on CB, cannabinoid receptors. There's two of these, CB1 and CB2. These are found in your brain and in different tissues in order to respond to endocannabinoids. When the endocannabinoids bind to these, you get a response. So the same lock and key scenario, the endocannabinoids are like the key, and then the receptor is the lock that unlocks these downstream responses.
Sorry guys, every time we move our microphone, we lose you. Hopefully you can hear us now.
Sorry about that. But as you hopefully heard in that brief snippet, and I apologize for that may have been a little bit awkward for you. But Dr. Ross, she gets right to the meat of the matter. She says she handles difficult concepts in very simple ways that I really recommend that she is someone that you go to and research. She has multiple presentations like that one. Again, that was a TED Talk from February of 2019. So if you've seen any of our other presentations, this next point might be old hat to you, but I believe this is such a striking example that I'm going to repeat it for the benefit of those who may be hearing it for the first time. So the two main endocannabinoids of which Dr. Ross was talking about, they are called anandamide and 2-AG. These compounds are actually quite fascinating as you learn about the ECS. They are created at the cellular level to the tune of thousands of times per second. So, millions of times over the course of a day, these compounds are popping up. So this is a very vibrant and dynamic organ system, the endocannabinoid system. But these two compounds, as far as researchers know, 2-AG and anandamide, they have been present and evolving in virtually all mammals for over 650 million years. These two molecules are involved in regulating things such as appetite, inflammation, pain threshold, seizure threshold, sleep, memory, and dozens of other processes and examples of homeostasis. They actually assist the body to the homeostasis of the whole organism. And they achieve this by their action on cannabinoid receptors, which, as I just said moments ago, are more abundantly expressed than all the other membrane receptors combined. They make up about 58% of all membrane receptors. So let's think about that for a second. We know that 80% of drugs, roughly 4 out of 5 drugs, work by interacting with one receptor or another at the cellular level, and 60% of all those receptors are endocannabinoid receptors. Just crazy. Well, here's how pervasive the endocannabinoid system is in pharmacy, and we didn't even know this until the last 20 years. Tylenol interacts and works via this 650 million year old system. So this graphic that's up on your screen right now was actually an aha moment for me a while back. And I say that, it sounds kind of corny, but it wasn't just something I found interesting in terms of something we're studying at work or we're working on or putting together a presentation. This was one of those moments that was a bigger scenario than that in my life, where I thought, this is so big, this is so life-changing to the world of pharmacy, that we better get on board and we better teach people about this. And I certainly have gone and put a lot of effort into understanding the endocannabinoid system and CBD, and it was a result of this picture. As you can see, Tylenol, at least its active metabolite of acetaminophen, which is AM404, looks almost identical in structure, clearly with a couple of different molecules at the business end there. But again, the cannabinoid receptors have been evolving for 650 million years, and the active metabolite of acetaminophen, which we amazingly discovered, what was that, Evan, late 1800s?
We discovered acetaminophen was first isolated in 1878, and this AM404 was discovered in 2008.
Crazy. That's crazy.
That's-
And you know, the whole idea that it mimics it so closely makes one think differently now about drugs and how drugs will affect other body systems.
Well, and I want to interrupt there for
No,
a
go
second
ahead.
and say, this might sound insane that, holy crap, we don't know how acetaminophen works, but we invite you to explore the literature and look it up and, you know, see how AM404 does all of the actions that we know Tylenol, acetaminophen leads to. And, you know, the mechanism of action of acetaminophen was unknown until very recently.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you do some of that research, you know, some websites that you end up at, they'll say MOA and how, you know, what is acetaminophen's mechanism of action. It's officially still unknown. So these facts and discoveries that Dr. Russo has made have led him to say, for every drug in the future, designers will have to consider its impact on and interaction with the endocannabinoid system as it's being designed. In other words, this impacted Dr. Russo to the point where he believes, and he's, I don't know if you've had a chance to really look at his credentials there and you know who he is in the pharmaceutical world, but he's making a pretty bold statement there that no drug in the future can ignore the endocannabinoid system in its design phase.
And I'm going to interrupt again and say that once they discovered how pervasive this system is, they started looking back into it, and many drugs that have been prescribed for half a century actually interact with the endocannabinoid system as all or part of their mechanisms of action, and we didn't even know it until we looked back into it with, you know, the new receptor sites as an opportunity of research.
Yep,
So,
great point. So shifting gears a little bit here from the ECS, I talk to pharmacists every day about CBD. So I know that you have questions that are a little broader in scope than what is CBD and how does it work. So let's talk about some of those questions that we see on a regular basis in emails, and you know, we have forms on the website of what you want to see and talk about, and in conversations that I have. You know, we literally on a very regular basis are seeing these topics: FDA rulings and laws, State Board of Pharmacy statements, side effects, labeling, quality control, dosing, marketing, and maybe most importantly, selling CBD to your customers. You know, we see the question, I hear the question all the time, well, how do I know what products and to carry and to be able to sell in my store and to recommend to my customers? Those are questions, hopefully, that if you're on this webinar, you've already asked those questions yourself. Well, let's just look at a couple of these broad topics. FDA. The FDA has made a couple of very specific and clear statements regarding CBD. Number one, there are no therapeutic claims allowed, that we can't make a therapeutic claim about CBD in our marketing, in our statements. No product can have those claims on the product or in any of its marketing and website data and material. So that's very clear. Make no therapeutic claims. Number two, CBD is not to be used as a food additive. Number three, we can't call it a dietary supplement. So the FDA is really trying to be reasonable about the role of CBD and their role in our healthcare delivery system. But they're also saying, look, we just don't have the evidence yet. Please make no therapeutic claims. And when people are making unfounded therapeutic claims, they're coming down hard. Let's talk about how the FDA's statements that I have just talked about and how they intersperse with state-specific laws, and then maybe more importantly, how those individual state-specific laws interact and maybe are in conflict with State Board of Pharmacy rulings and statements. To go back in time a little bit, just to set the stage, back in December of 2018, President Trump signed into law the Farm Bill, which basically said that hemp was no longer illegal if it had less than 0.3% THC. So that caused a big splurge in CBD business, and everybody thought, okay, we're ready to go. Well, not so fast, because each of the 50 states may or may not have had laws that were in direct conflict with the Farm Bill and the FDA's laws. So we know that to be true in other areas of pharmacy, right? And we've got to look at the most stringent law when we're thinking about pharmacy. Well, the same holds when we're looking at CBD and state laws. We've got to bring that another level deeper. And what are your individual state boards' statements and warnings, and what's the position and guidance and prosecution statements? So those are things that can get complicated. And I'm going to say right off the bat here, there's no substitute for you becoming aware of what your particular state board of pharmacy says. But let me just throw in a couple of facts here and a couple of things. Back in June, so just 6 months ago, there were about 15 states where the state board of pharmacy was in direct conflict with either or both the FDA and its individual states' laws, meaning the state board of pharmacy may have been in conflict with the state Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, in terms of moving hemp and or marijuana across interstates. So those laws are changing daily, and we really need to keep up on those. And I'm going to go into a couple of very specific examples here. Idaho and South Dakota. So we know that for a long time, and if anybody has been on our website until very recently, we had 3 states that were red X'd out: South Dakota, Idaho, and Nebraska, where we just we're telling people, look, your state laws are so unclear, and no matter what the state board said, it was illegal in the state. That still seems to be the case with Idaho and South Dakota. So we're leaving those 2 right now as red X'd. But Nebraska, just within the past several weeks, they have had some statements by district attorneys in different counties, and the state board has made a statement that they're not going to make any statement, which they're remaining silent, which means defer to your state laws. Well, the state laws have allowed CBD to be sold in Nebraska, so we now have pharmacies purchasing CBD and selling them in their pharmacies. Again, you better be careful about what you're saying in terms of state laws and what the FDA says, but at least you're not forbidden by the State Board of Pharmacy anymore. And I would like to just make a shout out here to a few friends of ours that have called in and really worked with me to try to get some of this information, specifically Tim in Nebraska, Kevin in Louisiana, and Kim in Missouri, because Louisiana and Missouri followed much like Nebraska, where the state boards came out and said, we have no guidance, so defer to state law and federal law. In that case, depending on what the state law may have been in the individual states, that no guidance means go ahead and sell CBD. We're not forbidding it, or we don't have any prosecution standards in place. Iowa is in that bucket as well. Someone just typed that in. Is that someone from Iowa, John? Yeah, great point. We didn't have it up here on this. And again, that's why I'm saying, please check with your individual state board. Don't take this as the final word on whether something is legal or illegal.
It's a perfect example.
That is a great example. So somebody just typed into the chat, is an Iowa in that bucket? Yes, I do know that Iowa is, but I've not been able to get any specific wording from the state board in Iowa. I have spoken to a couple of pharmacists in Iowa, and they tell me that, and their directive is don't sell it for right now.
Please feel free to send us any correspondence you receive from your state board, though.
Absolutely. That's how I just got this information on Louisiana, Nebraska, and Missouri very recently. But in the meantime, let's talk about Ohio, West Virginia, and Texas. These are states where 6-9 months ago, the state board had put out a statement saying do not have CBD on your pharmacy shelves. And they have since, the state boards have since come out with statements saying we're no longer looking at it as an illegal product or something that we're advising you to keep off of your shelves. I know for a fact in Ohio, that was a letter that the State Board of Pharmacy put out on July 30th. So things are changing that quickly. There are 2 other states that I just want to have a real quick statement about. These are indicative of probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 other states like Iowa and Maryland, and I can't remember the others, but North Carolina and California are still in that bucket where the state board says, really, we don't want you to have CBD on your shelves until we're able to get some further clarification from the FDA. So the other question that we see on a very regular basis is the quality differences among products, that there's inconsistent labeling and a lack of standards between all of the CBD manufacturers. How does someone fight through that? So Ev, can you talk to us for a little bit about what a high quality CBD product looks like?
Sure thing. So a high quality CBD product, because there are so many different manufacturers, a lot of them have different processes. And part of what we did is establish which of those processes are closest to meeting pharmaceutical standards. And we used about 12 or 15 different criteria, but we want to highlight here 3 or 4 of the criteria that are most important and that you can look for and educate yourself on to sort of see what we were doing. So the first thing is a CBD product, the CBD in it should be hemp derived. And that's because hemp is legally defined as any cannabis plant with less than 0.3% THC, which in most cases would be undetectable in any normal assay. In fact, hemp was removed from the legal definition of marijuana in the CSA as per the Farm Bill of 2018. So a lot of things are changing here. The next thing is, how is the CBD extracted from the plant? There are many methods, but 3 of the best methods are supercritical CO2, cryogenic ethanol, and cold press extraction. And that's because these are solventless, or at least close to solventless. CO2 evaporates at room temperature, and cryogenic ethanol is able to be evaporated at lower pressures than normal ethanol is. So these leave very few residual solvents, and they can be extracted in one more step. So butane, for example, is something that it's very hard to get all of the solvent out of the plant, out of the final product. And manufacturers that use that, that immediately disqualified them from being considered even for the website. The next thing, and potentially the most important, is that the CBD products are tested by a third-party lab to verify that the CBD has no THC, or at least an undetectable amount of THC, that it has no heavy metals or pesticides, which can be pulled from the soil, so that it was clean soil that the plant was in, and that a QR code linking to these lab tests is present on all the labeling and packaging of the product. Lastly, where the hemp is sourced from. Hemp typically shouldn't be transported across international lines because where it might have been grown doesn't necessarily have the same standards as hemp does to be grown in this country. So we only considered products that were fully made in the United States. So those are a few of the criteria that that must be met for a product to be considered quality.
Thanks, Ev. So I hope that answers some questions for you about what we're considering a high quality CBD product, and certainly anything that we're going to be recommending to you would fall into that category. So the internet has allowed CBD to get out in front of the FDA and other governing bodies in a way that has never happened before. Let me explain what we mean by that. So we know that CBD sales have exploded over the past couple of years, and they're looking to continue to explode. You see that there's one projection of $22 billion by 2022. That's only a couple of years away. So that explosion has caused a situation where millions of people are purchasing CBD every month. And the FDA hasn't yet approved it for consumption by the public. Excuse me. So when we say that's never happened before, any product that we as pharmacists would be selling or recommending, we know that the FDA has already done all of the testing on it, and we know it's at least generally regarded as safe, and there is dosing recommendations and so on. The FDA hasn't really gotten to that point yet. There is an exception to that with Epidiolex, which we're going to touch on briefly. But this has led to confusion when combined with my last major point about when I was talking about State Board of Pharmacy particular rulings in individual states. So the FDA has remained silent on some of this, but some of the state boards of pharmacy that we talked about have said, well, you can't sell CBD on your shelves. Don't have it on your shelves. Not a good idea. And certainly, we're going to come after you if you do. That has set up a scenario where Mrs. Jones, who might be a 4th generation customer of your store, comes into you and asks for some counseling advice or recommendation on a product for CBD, and you're not able to help her. You just have to tell her you can't help her. Well, she leaves your store, walks down the street, goes into the beauty salon or the convenience store, and she picks up CBD. Is that really what we want to see happening? Because, we're going to talk about side effects and some other things here in a moment, but that's not a situation we want. So I applaud every single one of you that's on this webinar, because the good news is you're educating yourselves. And as I said in my opening words, we created the NCPA CBD source specifically for the community pharmacist, because we believe strongly and we believe deeply that CBD belongs in a pharmacy for just this reason. That looks like the nicest lady in the world, but she doesn't know what medications your customer is taking. And I personally believe that CBD is going to have to be cordoned off and maybe will only be available via specific channels, maybe something akin to how Sudafed is available today. I'm not saying it will be prescription only. I really doubt that'll happen. There may be a dose dependent thing that would make something a prescription only. But we certainly don't want patients going to this nice woman to buy their CBD when she should be buying it off of a healthcare professional, specifically a pharmacist. So there are several reasons that I say that, and one is that the FDA has stated that it is a drug with side effects and drug interactions. And so
no, just to interrupt you for a second here, Tim, about drug interactions. I know before we've talked about this. Can you maybe explain a little bit about warfarin? I think we've heard that there may need to be a dosage adjustment even if a patient is on warfarin and they decide that they want to start taking CBD.
Yep, great point. Yeah, I should have said this already. When we're talking about the Mrs. Jones walking down the street to the convenience store or the beauty salon, she's going to be purchasing CBD and maybe taking a high enough dose. Well, she's not aware that there's going to be an interaction between warfarin and CBD. And we know that can be a pretty significant interaction. CBD is also metabolized in the liver by one of the CYP450 enzymes called CYP3A4 and CYP2C19. So knowing that warfarin is also metabolized by those same two primary enzymes, we can have a situation where someone taking an adequate dose, but not a high dose of CBD, and they're also on warfarin, they can have their blood levels of warfarin be as much as 30% higher than it should be. So, I don't need to tell this crowd what that can mean. So there are real life issues and interactions that could be problematic. So even if CBD never becomes a regulated legend drug, as I'm suggesting, outside of obviously its designation as such already as Epidiolex, but people are still going to need to be advised on how to use it, when to use it, and they're always going to have questions. Well, the research is exploding globally, and we're waiting for that verified evidence to come across that we all hope is that evidence is going to show what we all hope is true, and that it'll be indeed confirmed that CBD is a wonderful drug and a powerful drug, but that yes, indeed, it has some manageable downsides. Well, when and if that happens, where does that drug belong? The whole point of the CBDsource.com is that drug belongs in a pharmacy. Well, how do we prepare for that? PRS and NCPA believe that to prepare for that, we have begun to put all the info that we can into one place where you can learn about CBD and other things like the endocannabinoid system. You can get marketing materials so that you can educate yourself on how to communicate with your community, and you can purchase CBD products for sale in your pharmacy. NCPA and PRS, we are actively creating marketing kits that you can customize for your pharmacy. Not only electronic kits, but we're putting together hard kits as well, boxes where you could get bag stuffers, acrylic display cases, public service announcements, press releases, scripts for when you speak to your local physicians, training for your staff, private customized labels, and more. So let's talk. I see we're getting a little late here. It's 2:46. I want to leave some time for some questions. I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly, but let's talk about the products quickly that are available on ncpacbdsource.com, how and why they were chosen. Well, we were faced with the same problems you were on how do we decide which manufacturers, which companies that we made available to pharmacies. NCPA and PRS started with a set of conditions that I'm going to list just a few of them here. They're really not an exhaustive list, but we asked that the manufacturers that we were going to be taking seriously were pharmacist owned or operated, that they were making no claims about their products either on the label or on the websites, that they were all US sourced, they submitted to random testing, random third-party testing, as Evan talked about, that there was no THC detectable, that what's on the label is indeed what was in the bottle, back to the testing, and that they were willing to follow guidelines that NCPA and PRS may put down in the future, and that the manufacturers have pledged to try to really keep their products in pharmacy. Because there are no accepted governing standards of what a company can say and when they can say it, we were not able to take what a company said for granted or take their word for it. So we verified these products. These products have been tested and verified. But let me be clear and as fair as possible, we are not saying these are the 3 best in the world. We're not making that statement because that somehow would be saying that all the others are somehow less than. What we're actually saying is that these companies have met the standards that I just glanced over for you, and that we have a deeper set of those standards that I just haven't brought up yet today. But we looked at this and said, how would you, the pharmacist, be able to evaluate these CBD products? We have an expert in-house, and it was still a daunting task for us. So someone filling a couple of hundred scripts a day and running your business, how could you expect yourself to properly vet these CBD companies? Well, that's the primary reason that NCPA CBD Source was created. We've done that work for you. We've hopefully done that heavy lifting for you, and you can come and please check out all the information on the website.
Okay, I'm going to put Tim's information up here on the screen just so everyone has all of this. Please know that Tim takes calls daily, will answer emails. He's readily accessible and loves to be, talking to pharmacists and their staff about CBD. So feel free to call him or email him anytime. We'll try to get to as many of these questions as we can.
Sincerely, I mean that. Don't be afraid. Don't hesitate to call me.
Okay, I'm going to start with this first question that we had. So other than opioids and warfarin, are there any other drugs that CBD has a negative response to?
Yes. Valproic acid is the first drug that jumps to mind. And there are a couple of other anti-epileptic drugs. So yeah, as a result of Epidiolex and the studies that were done to get that drug to market, there are some FDA approved guidelines with evidence, research evidence that we're typically used to seeing about side effects and dosing and so on, but in a very narrow therapeutic category. But yes, there are, and warfarin and a couple of these anti-epileptics are the big ones for sure.
Okay, so somebody asked, which formulation do we recommend for anxiety or pain, and what are the dosing guidelines?
Well, there is no easy answer to that one. clearly that starts to fall over into exactly what I said we're not able to do, and that is make therapeutic claims. And the dosing, once you start talking about dosing, it's a very slippery slope because you're talking about dosing for a specific therapeutic condition. Really, I'm not going to go there.
Okay, here's a quick one. Are any of the companies paying to be on the site?
What was that, Ev, before we did it?
We had another question that just came through that asked, are these interactions basically the same as grapefruit? And yes, they're very similar. Grapefruit does inhibit the CYP3A4 enzyme as well. I believe it's 3A4, as well as some of the other ones. And yes, CBD, if you can't have grapefruit with a drug, then you probably should avoid CBD as well. That was an awesome question. Kind of bummed we didn't include that already.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking.
Well,
Yeah,
we're going to add it now.
Yeah, there's some information about the enzymes that it interacts with on the one slide that was on this. And just so everyone knows, this webinar will be available on the website. So to repeat
Linda,
this.
you asked that question about, are these companies paying to be on the site?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
And we're not, that's not ever.
We would never even entertain that. Okay. Do you recommend that pharmacies carry only 0% THC CBD products?
Absolutely. The problem is, how do you know that the products that you're buying are going to have 0% THC? This gets back to what's a high quality product look like? Is there third party testing being done on it? That's why we're saying we've vetted these companies. We know you come here that I can say yes to these, but is that something you can do out in the Wild West that CBD has become in general? No, you can't.
So we get a lot of state questions. Somebody asked specifically, is it legal to sell any CBD in Michigan?
As I understand, yes, it is. The State Board of Pharmacy, and when I look at legality, with the exception of something like Idaho and South Dakota that I talked about, where the state has some objections to CBD, and I'm not going to bother going into those here. And certainly, if you want to know what those are, we can talk about it after the webinar. But in Michigan, the State Board of Pharmacy has remained silent. So I know for a fact that we have a couple of stores in Michigan that are purchasing CBD, and I don't see a problem. Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is a two-part question, and I think this will be for Evan. So what tests must be done to know exactly the amount of CBD in each product? And how does THC get separated from the product?
Okay, so good questions. That's actually a two-part question, and I'm going to answer the second part first. How does THC get separated from the product? Well, if the product is truly hemp-derived, then there shouldn't be any THC in it in the first place, and it shouldn't therefore have to be removed. If it's less than 0.3% in the plant, it'll certainly be less than that in product, and that's mostly undetectable. If it's less than that, it's certainly undetectable. Next, what test must be done to know exactly the amount of CBD? So the point of third-party lab tests, among other things, is primarily to determine just that, the amount of CBD in the product, volume per weight. And they use mass spectrometry and gas chromatography to do that, so it's extremely accurate down to nanograms. So,
good question, Virginia.
One more thing actually that just came through is someone, this is more of a statement than a question. She said, I ask customers to speak with their providers for potential side effects and liver enzyme blood tests. And then I also suggest that they monitor their blood pressure at home if they want to take CBD. So that is a
that's perfect. Was that Ann that wrote that in?
That was Ann.
And that speaks exactly to the emphasis that we're trying to get across here, that this belongs in a pharmacy. This belongs in our hands, not the convenience store clerk, because the things like the blood pressure effects and the liver enzymes and liver enzyme tests, that's this is a drug. It's a drug that my wife has been using for 2.5 years, and if it's an OTC drug, that's fine. We still need to be aware of it, and it needs to be in pharmacy.
So Bob asked, what are the compendial tests required for inclusion on your website? Just for the sake of time, I would ask Bob that you go ahead and give us a call at the number on the screen, the number above Tim's email address, and we can talk about that at length. that would require much more detail than we're able to.
Yeah, we got
cover
about
now.
5
Yeah.
more minutes of question answering here, but yeah, Bob, give me a call.
Absolutely. So somebody wrote, since CBD is an over-the-counter item, how do we know the suppliers are complying with the FDA manufacturing regulatory practices?
Well, we don't,
There aren't any.
because there aren't any regulatory practices as of this moment that the FDA has prescribed or described. And that's exactly the point. We don't. So we have created our own set of conditions, and we've held them we've held the CBD companies against those standards.
Somebody from Arkansas is asking this question, but I think this just applies across the board. So they're saying the state pharmacy board says the DEA states that you should sell CBD at your own risk. And they wrote, don't want to mess with the DEA. So what do you have to say about that?
Donald, great point. You don't want to mess with the DEA. The DEA is divorced from CBD, though. So just to make this clear, if there is no THC in the CBD, the DEA is not involved. They don't want to be involved. They're not involved, just like they would not be involved in a bottle of CoQ10 and how it's being sold or not.
The DEA is actually prohibited from being involved in spending any federal monies on questioning hemp, as hemp was removed from the definition of marijuana with the Farm Bill, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, so it just reverts back to it's a matter of THC.
I'm going to ask this question and answer it. Somebody asked, will you all develop more patient handouts, et cetera, and make it a little less commercial? So the marketing section of ncpacbdsource.com, really that's the goal of that section. We found that most of the pharmacies, the handouts that they were getting, the information that they were giving out to patients was coming directly from brands. And if you haven't truly vetted those brands, how do you know that that information is correct? So what we've done with the website is really take that information away from the brands, make it non-brand specific, make sure that the information is accurate that you would be handing out to your customers, and also make it customizable for your pharmacy so it would be branded to you and not just one specific brand. The other reason for that is that we understand that most pharmacies are carrying multiple brands in their pharmacy, which we believe they should be. So it would be better if that information that you were putting out there, that marketing information and that education, patient education information, was more branded towards your pharmacy. So that's why we've done that. Yes, definitely a little less commercial.
Yep. So I had a question here.
About efficacy. Here's one. If there's enough information on efficacy and interactions for me to stock it in my pharmacy. We've had a couple of those, actually. There's a couple questions here about effectiveness and efficacy.
Well, that's a yes and no answer to a question like that. There's tons of research being done, but none of it has been FDA approved yet. It hasn't gone through the whole rigorous testing process. And as we know, not all CBD is created equal. So if there is anyone out there who is still somewhat confused, or your head's still spinning with all things CBD. But John, before I read this, what was that last question you had up there? That let's see. How many companies did you research before choosing the ones on CBD Source? Mm-hmm. It started out with greater than 50. I honestly don't know the exact number. We pulled it down after the first set of conditions and testing and surveying to about 18. And then we pulled that down to just about a handful as we were arriving at those 3.
Brianne also asked another question. Which is more profitable to use or more popular, topical or oral?
That is a great question. I really, until I'm reading that question, I haven't even thought of it in those terms. Which is more profitable to use? Do you mean by that which is more profitable to sell? These all have about the same markup, but I'm reading that also to mean which has the greater efficacy per dollar spent for the customer. And that depends on the condition, which according to FDA laws, I'm really not going to get into that. We can talk about that on the phone.
Give us a call.
But I can tell you, as I mentioned, my wife has been using CBD oil sublingually for about 2.5 years. And we have nothing but wonderful things to say about CBD. I use it, Evan uses it topically. I don't want to say every day, but I've got 59-year-old knees that after weekend warrior stuff, I certainly need it, and I can attest that it works.
I can
amazing.
attest that it works as well.
And I have allergies, and I had a hive yesterday, and I put it on it, and it worked.
Yeah, he was walking around all giddy about that. Let me end here with we had asked for people to put questions in when they registered, and that's what we're reading from here. And some of these questions are coming across live, but somebody named Marianne wrote in her questions, I have some questions, a few, a lot. I can't think of anything right now. That about sums up how I know a lot of pharmacists feel about CBD. We really hope that this sort of pooled a lot of information into some manageable place for you. Please use us as a resource. Use me personally as a resource.
We have one more question here.
Pharmacy should be where.
One more question.
One more question from Tracy. Why would CBD less than 0.03% make a drug screen positive? So it's less than 0.3%, 0.3%, not 0.03, and that's a tricky question. So the cannabidiol molecule will never be transformed into what the compound that the drug tests test for marijuana, which is THC carboxyl. However, CBD products may have THC in them depending on the manufacturing processes. So a CBD product can lead to a positive, not a false positive, but a true positive. But the CBD molecule won't your body can't transform that.
It's not a false positive situation. It is there might be THC in a less than reputable product.
Right.
Or do we know that the person isn't inhaling THC in some other fashion? We're at 3:02. We are past this. Honestly, we could sit here and do this for
all day.
hours. We could do it all day. I love this. I love answering the questions.
Do it for fun.
Don't hesitate to call, send emails. We're going to end this webinar. We've already taken more of your time than we had planned. Apologize for going over.
Thanks for attending, everybody.
Honestly, thank you.
Thank you.
Trade deal.